Hey guys, it's Jade from Themeco bringing you another video. One of the common questions that gets asked are about contact forms. What contact form is compatible with Accent Pro and how to style a contact form. We have decided to bring you a fresh series which aims to walk you through the basics of the contact forms that comes bundled with X and show you some creative designs that you can style your contact area or contact forms by using the features available on the builder and by adding some custom CSS to style and beautify your forms. For the first installment of the series, I will be walking you through the setup of this design that you're seeing in your screen right now, including the customization needed to achieve this styling. So let's start off the series with a simple but neat design that you can implement to your contact forms. So let's jump into the builder and get started. Since this is the first video of the series, I would like to first go over the order of the things we will cover in each video. First, I would introduce the contact form that we will be using throughout the series, which is the Contact Form 7 plugin. Then walk you through the setup of the form elements about how we will structure the form's HTML codes in order for us to further style it later with CSS. I will not dive into the email submission setup of Contact Form 7 since we will only cover how to come up with the styled forms for each of the videos in the series. Then I will also go over each element we will be adding on the builder and explain how I came up with the layout of the contact form container and other information elements on the page. Lastly, I will also explain the CSS codes that we will be using to style the contact forms. So let's create a blank page and get started. So we are on our builder right now, and let's start creating the layout of the elements that we will be using for this tutorial. And firstly, the template I am using right now is a blank, no container, no header, no footer, so that all you could see will be the elements that we will use. So let's start adding our section. And that's just one column. Let's remove the default padding of the sections and then edit the row settings and disable the global containers so that our map that we will place here will fill the entire width. And let's add the map element, and we'll use an embed code. We could get it from Google Maps. Share, embed map, copy HTML, then paste the embed code here. And this is too large for what we're aiming for, so to set the height of the frame of this map, you could click on frame and then set the fixed height to the height that you want it to be. In this case, maybe we'll have 400 pixels height, and that's it, we have our map. So to save time, I have added the second row that contains the text content for this setup. Let's quickly go over how I did this. So I added a row wherein I chose this layout and added some padding around the columns, set the background color for each column, and then added some elements in each column. There is nothing really special about the setup here. I had the headline that I set some settings for the text options, a text element, another headline element, and then a headline element. For this type of layout, I have set a graphic to the headline element, have it enabled, and set all the settings here, chose the icon. And then the first line is the default text for the headline element. And then the second line would be the sub-headline setup. So I just had it enabled and added the subheadline. That goes the same for the telephone. And as for the email address, I just disable the subheadline for this one. And the three of these icons are button elements. For these, I disabled the text content setting or the text setup and have the graphic setup enabled. But you've seen in the preview earlier, I pulled this row up. So let's try to do that, and that is quite easy to do through some custom CSS. So to do that, let's click on the row settings for the second row, customize, and then element CSS. And to target this element, we'll use $EL. And then we're going to use a CSS property, which is the transform. So that is transform, then translate. We're going to pull it up, so that is the y-axis. And since we're going to pull it upwards, we're going to put in a negative value. So let's say 150 pixels. That's a bit too much. So let's say maybe 125. Okay, that looks okay for me. And by the way, I also added a box shadow to the row settings, just so I could have some sort of dimension for this row. Now we're ready to start with the setup of our contact form. For this video series, we're going to be working on the Contact Form 7 plugin. It is one of the approved plugins that comes with Pro and X, which means that it has been tested with the releases of the versions of the themes that we produce. If you haven't installed it yet, you could go to the Pro or X panel, scroll down to the bottom part and install it from there. You can also go to the plugins page and then search it there and install it. That should work the same. Once you have that installed and activated, you could go to the Forms panel and create a new contact form. And let's create one. Let's name our form. Once you create a contact form in the Contact Form 7 panel, you're going to have the default fields for the form. But for this, we're going to use our custom layout as well as the fields. So let's quickly go over the setup of this. So each line will be divided into divs, which has a class of rows. So we have 4 rows here, and some of the rows have 2 columns and some only have 1 column. We need to add this so that we'll be able to style them correctly through the custom CSS that we'll be adding later. That's the only thing we need to take note for this setup. So let's add this form to our builder and then style it. So we're now back to our builder, and let's add the Contact Form 7 that we have just created to this column. Once you have activated the Contact Form 7 plugin, you should be able to see the Contact Form 7 element from here. So that's here, and let's add that one. And let's choose the contact form we have created earlier. Okay. As this is getting the typical and then the default styling that comes with the stack that we are using right now, which is okay, but we aim to make our design better. So we will be adding some custom CSS to further style our contact form. So now let's save it and start adding our custom CSS. So I have already written the CSS codes earlier to make things faster, but let's just go over the codes that we have here so that we'll be able to understand how it was able to style the contact form fields. So earlier we created rows for each line. So each of these fields are in one row. Earlier I mentioned that there are rows that has 2 columns and then 1 column. An example of the 2-column row is just the first name and then the last name, and 1-column row is the message and the send button. We set the display to flex, and then the justify content to space between, then flex wrap to wrap, so that when this collapses, each of these form fields will be stacked above each other. And then I set the margin top so that there would be some spacing above each row. And then I set the flex value for the 1 column to 100 so that it will fill the entire row. And as for the 2 columns, I set it to 48% so that each of the fields inside the row, which is actually the column, will be 48%. And in order for it to have the space between, there's going to be a 2% space between the fields or the columns. And they're looking separated because we set the justify content to space between. Next, I have styled each of the input fields. I set the border to 0 because you've seen earlier that there is a border that surrounds each of the fields. But then I set the border bottom to 2 pixels with a solid color because that's the only border that we need for the fields. And then I set the box shadow to none so that it will override the default stack box shadow that gets added to the form fields. And then I set the margin bottom to 0. And lastly, this block of code is for the submit button. All of these CSS lines here are to override the default stack CSS. So these are the only CSS codes we needed to add in order for us to come up with this styled content form. So this ends the first installment for the Creative Contact Form series. We hope that this has been useful, and we look forward into bringing you more videos in the series. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.